Hey guys, so I just spent about half an hour and I recorded this really great video talking about this week's article and realized afterwards that I did not have my microphone plugged in. How awesome is that? So I will use this as an opportunity to re-record and basically warn you this will be a long video, maybe about half an hour, but I think it's absolutely worth it. This week's article was not another one that it was another one that did not feature a single deck, so you won't have any videos from me this week regarding a casual deck, a deck list, playthroughs, etc. What I actually wanted to talk about this week was the banned and restricted list for Pauper. I do cover last week's metagame as always, my new addition to this article. Excuse me. But we had the releasing not too long ago of the banned and restricted changes, and it did not affect Pauper, and I really wanted to take this opportunity to talk about what I thought about the banned and restricted list in relation to Pauper. Now, I'm not going to spend any time on the current list. The current ban list is only 2 cards, and both of them I think should stay on the list. What I want to do for you, though, I am not going to sit here and read you the article, but I do want to take the opportunity to talk about this for anyone who may not want to read my article, who may just be a YouTube watcher and want to check out stuff here. So I'm going to kind of add this walkthrough and just put it on my channel and see what you have to say. I will start with a disclaimer here. I am not the kind of person who thinks that I am the end-all when it comes to Magic and what should happen. I like to give my opinions. Everyone likes to give their opinions. This world is full of opinions, but they are just that. They are opinions. And I'm the kind of person where I love discussion. So I definitely recommend to go over to puremtgo.com, add your comments, add your discussion. There's been a lot of talk about this on forums throughout the interwebs, regarding the ban list in every aspect. And I absolutely love that. I think discussion is a great thing when it's kept, the way a discussion should be, when it's productive. Please don't bring in the trolling comments, etc., the bad mouthing each other. It's not necessary. The point is to work to improve a format that we all love. So that being said, I really focused on this week. There are 3 decks that have always been topping off the metagame. We always have Mono Blue Control, we have Is It Post, and we have Storm. And these 3 decks have really dominated. Occasionally we will see Storm switch with Goblins. I don't think there needs to be any change with Goblins. I think that is fine the way it is. I really don't think any ban or restriction to that deck is going to make a difference. Storm actually ends up in the top 3 more often, so that's why I wanted to talk about it. Now, this is really an issue, I think, not so much about Pauper being, having decks that are so overpowered that they're really keeping other decks from being competitive. Mono Blue Control is very, very prevalent. I really think that's a big culprit and needs to be addressed. That may be a personal bias, but what I really think the issue is the fact that changes need to be made to keep the format from going stale. Because we have kind of the same decks at the same positions every week. Now, the format's really healthy. We have a lot of rogue decks that make, showings, and I love it. But I do think that sometimes changes need to be made to keep the format, alive and well. So, we're going to start with Mono Blue Control. This is a deck that dominates every week. It's always significantly more showings than everyone else. I have a significant, anger towards it. I apologize. I have been playing it a couple times in the tournament practice room. If anyone's come across it and is as frustrated with Mono Blue Control as I am, I do apologize. But I always find the best way to find out how to beat a deck is to play that deck and understand the interactions between the cards. Because once you understand how the cards interact, then you can decide what's the best way to dismantle it. It's kind of like working backwards on the puzzle. So the thing about Mono Blue Control is there are a lot of versions. I use the term Mono Blue Control to kind of loop together a whole bunch of different versions. You get a lot of 8-post Blue Control, you get Fairies, you get Delver. I personally think those 2 decks are so similar they should be the same, but you do get a couple different variations. So that becomes very hard when it comes down to choosing a card to ban to slow that down. When it comes down to that, you're like, well, you could take this card out, but not every blue deck runs it, and that's good and bad. When you make a change to the banned and restricted list, you want to be able to slow down a deck without killing it. That's always the key here. So the first card that a lot of people have been talking about is Cloud of Fairies. Um, this is a card, excuse me, that a lot of people are saying needs to go for mono blue control, and I understand it. It's a very powerful card. It's a 1/1 creature with flying, no big deal for 2. But the fact is that it allows you to untap those lands, which allows you the second play, and the fact that it has cycling, I think, is something that people underestimate. Definitely a great mechanic to have. But I do not think this is the answer. If you were to ban Cloud of Fairies, sure, it might slow down mono blue control, but more importantly, what it's going to do, and people are overlooking this, is that it will kill off the Fissure or Familiar Storm, however you want to title that deck. That deck generates mana based off of Cloud of Fairies and Snap, untapping the Ravnica dual, Pauper dual lands, and using those to generate mana. Now, if you got rid of Cloud of Fairies, the only option available to it would be Snap, and that is not enough to generate a Storm. So, I think that is, whether or not Cloud of Fairies should go, I don't think it will go because of the fact that it's going to kill off that deck. In fact, what I suggested is instead we use Spellstutter Sprite. Really the ideal play for mono blue control that I found is turn 1 island into Delver. On turn 2 Delver flips, I play Cloud of Fairies, and untap mana. Now I have it open and available for a counterspell or a sprite, either way. That's really the ideal play, and playing mono blue control, I found a lot of times in the mirror match, what it would come down to is the winner would be the person who had that turn 2 Cloud of Fairies, oddly enough. So I really think maybe the sprite is going to be the answer. If you look at the mono blue control decks, they are not extremely heavy on counterspells. They really feel heavy on counterspells, but part of that is the fact that the sprite acts as a counterspell. And in Pauper, you can really easily manipulate it to the fact that the sprite is going to counter just about anything. What really gets it is the ninja allows it to return. I considered discussing the ninja as the option for banning because of its card draw. But the fact that you can get the sprites back and continually replay them is why the deck feels so counter heavy. It's not necessarily the actual spells, but the sprites. Kind of the best thing about the sprites, and it's something I love about the Wayfinder, etc. in green, is the fact that not only is it a rampant growth, but it's rampant growth on a stick. You get the counterspell, but I also get a 1/1 creature with flying out of it as well, and that's 2 spells for the price of 1. A long time ago, about a year ago, I guess, on Pure, I did write an article talking about card advantage, and this is a way to kind of generate card advantage, just the fact that I'm using 1 card, and it does 2 things. 2 spells, 1 card, awesome. So I think that maybe this is, if you're going to approach a fairy, is the thing to ban, and I don't think that's going to kill the deck. Getting rid of that, you can still have your turn 2 play Cloud of Fairies into a counterspell, but it would kind of change the format a bit. It would not make it so powerful. Another thing is if you got rid of Cloud of Fairies, you're not really going to slow down the sprite, because you could do turn 1, it's, I think, the Zephyr sprite. There is that 1/1 fairy drop for 1 blue mana. There are options to build up that fairy count if you get rid of Cloud of Fairies that will still make the sprite dominant. So the next card I considered, I didn't actually talk about this much in my article. I kind of thought about it during the writing. I've suggested it on forums, but decided that it probably wasn't the answer, is Counterspell. Now this card is basically the epitome of blue. This describes blue mana in Magic to the T. It's been around forever, it's absolutely strong, it's great. Maybe it shouldn't have been a common, I really don't know, I don't want to comment on that much, but I think this is the only card when you look at mono blue control decks that is absolutely the same in every mono blue control. If you run 4 copies of Counterspell in mono blue control, getting rid of that, doesn't matter what it is, will kind of bring back the power. What this is going to do, however, is increase the use of mana leaks and rune snag. This is good and bad. I love rune snag, I wish it was played more often. So your deck all of a sudden, it's still got counterspells, but now you have outs. The fact that mana leak and rune snag allow you to pay that mana to counter the counterspell, negate the counterspell, is fantastic for the opponent. But what that also may mean is the rise in 8-post decks. If everyone starts running 4 copies of rune snag, all of a sudden I need that extra mana, and hell, I'm going to run Is It Post or Demir Post to be able to have it to counter your counterspell without using a spell. So that's basically why I left out Counterspell. Is I had considered it, but in the end I kind of realized that this is kind of a ridiculous idea. I really don't think it's going to change things. The next thing on the chopping block was Delver of Secrets. Now, I'm not saying that all these have to go. These are just cards that I'm individually looking at and saying, hey, maybe we need to consider this card. So Delver of Secrets is incredibly powerful. I often wonder if Wizards has any regrets about, printing cards, and this is one of the ones that I did consider on whether or not they had to have a regret about printing Delver of Secrets. So this card is, it's ridiculous. This card has allowed mono blue control to move from control to aggro, and at the same time, it can be said that mono blue control is aggro and control, because sure, now they're running heavier on creatures, but because of the sprites, you still have a lot of control. This card has really, I don't want to say changed the game, but it has become a default card. This, I want to say, was like Counterspell when it was introduced. This has changed how mono blue builds. If you're playing mono blue, 98% of the time you're running a full set of Delver. If you look at Modern, it's become, its own format. You look at Legacy even, Classic, it's Delver this, Delver that. Now, it's really become an absolute four of in any kind of control deck that runs blue, because it's so, strong. The fact that you can attack on turn 2 for 3 is very powerful. There were very few options for that. The Wild in the Kettle is the only thing, I believe, that allows you to do that in Pauper. And that is very hard to do. You can't do it when it comes to Pauper because you lose the dual lands, but it is that kind of same thing where you attack for 3. Delver has that ability. And what this has really kind of changed how mono blue builds. Now, you want to call it Fairy, you want to call it Delver, whatever it is, you see this change where the deck is all of a sudden probably running, in excess of 20 creatures. When you're running, they run Delver, they run Bears, both Fairies, they run Stitch Drakes, they run Spire Golems. Now you have this creature that has really turned it into aggro, and at the same time, they still have a heavy counter package in their non-creatures. And the converted mana cost is very low as well. Delver of Secrets is 1 blue. When you bring that mana curve down, you don't need to run as many lands. You look at mono blue, it is not uncommon to see a deck that's running only 17 lands. No longer do I have to pack my deck with 24, 25 lands. I can cut that back significantly and get Delver of Secrets out. And it's really just, it's changed the way that mono blue control plays, I think. Now, I'm not sure getting rid of it is actually going to have any effect. It would dial back the aggressiveness a little bit, but you would still have to deal with Spire Golems, and you would still have to deal with Stitch Drakes, when it comes to that. So, it was something I want to throw out there just because it's a very powerful card. Not sure it's really going to make a difference, but I'm trying to get the creative juices flowing and get people thinking. That's what it's always about. It's like your teachers in high school and stuff. They always wanted to get you thinking before you wrote a paper, and get you on the right track to making the right decision. Next card I wanted to discuss is Gush. This is not necessarily my idea. This was something that I saw suggested by someone, and I thought they made a pretty good case for it. So I thought I would suggest it. It's not as prevalent as it probably needs to be banned. Maybe if they were to restrict it, something like that. It's just a very powerful card. I'm not sure it makes or breaks this deck, but it is very powerful. You have to look at the fact that, sure, it's a 5 cost, but you're never going to pay 5 for the spell. You're always going to use it as a return 2 lands to play this card, and that allows you to make a land drop that you may have missed. So you play, you got tap, a land to put out a bear. You Gush, return those 2 lands, put one back into play. You have all kinds of options to leave mana open yet again after drawing 2 cards for a counter spell, for a force spike, for another Delver, another Bear, something like that. You got a lot of options if you miss that mana drop to put another land into play based off of Gush alone. And this is something, like I said, it's not necessarily my idea, but it's a powerful card. I'm not sure it's going to affect the deck very much if you remove it, but it's something that had to be at least noted. I considered. So next on the list is it Post. Now this is kind of more specifically going to just be 8 Post in general. I am kind of specifically going to address Is It Post, but really the issue comes down to the locust lands, and this has really been kind of a topic of discussion. I've heard a lot of crying for the banning of Cloud Post, the banning of Is It Post decks, and I feel it's a bit off-center because, I see these people on the forums talking about how dominant it is, but when I play, it doesn't, it's a little janky when it comes to the mana base. It doesn't feel so dominant that I'm going to cry for a banning. But because so many people are talking about it, because it's consistently like the number 2 deck, it does at least require being addressed. Now there's a kind of an interesting argument that I pointed out in my article this week about 8 Post, and it's the fact that these 2 lands have enabled the creation of 8 mana blue, 8 post blue, 8 post green, Dimir Post, Is It Post, Rebels, just all of these decks, and you have to wonder do these decks simply exist because these 2 lands are here? Is that good? Is that bad? Is it good for the format that these lands can create such a variety of decks, or does it say something about the power level of these 2 cards that these decks are created? It's definitely an interesting thing to consider. I'm not going to weigh in on my opinion because I want you to kind of formulate your own opinion on whether or not it's a good thing that these have created those rogue decks. We'll talk about the fact that Cloud Post is the one that everyone's calling for being banned. I don't think this is a good idea. Actually, I'm going to say that this is the incorrect way to approach beating Is It Post. And not beating it necessarily, but dealing with it when it comes to the banned and restricted list. Now, getting rid of that would kill this deck. Is It Post basically runs off the big mana. I think getting rid of this is a mistake. I think the deck is, it's powerful, but, it may even have the chance, if you got rid of this, to transform into Tron Post. Bring in the full set of Urza lands and use those to ramp the mana instead of the Cloud Posts. I don't think getting rid of Cloud Posts is really the answer here. If the deck can transition that way, you're like, well, it's not really the mana base, it's got to be something else about the deck that's making it overpowered. Now, what I think the problem really is when it comes to these lands is actually Glimmer Post, as opposed to Cloud Post. Basically, when you play Is It Post, it comes down to the deck stalling out. It wants to get to the mid game, it wants to get the late game, and that's when it's going to beat you. The deck stalls, it slows down gameplay, it locks you out. And what allows this deck to do that is the Glimmer Posts. It's actually what helps this deck survive. The deck does run a whole bunch of little 1-red spells to kill off creatures, but a total of usually 6 between the lightning bolts, etc. spells in the deck is not going to stop aggro. What stops aggro is Glimmer Post. You can kill off a couple creatures and, hope to draw into more kill spells, but once you get those Glimmer Posts, you're gaining life. I really considered writing an article about this, I still may, but I think people underestimate the power of life gain in this format. When it comes to Glimmer Post, if you have the 8th Locust land coming out, you're gaining 8 life. And there are ways in that deck to abuse that and keep replaying it. They run the Ravnica duels, which allow you to bounce. They run Capsize, as you see here, which allow you to continuously play that. And if you get to that point where you are playing that 8th post land over and over and over again, you're gaining 8 life per turn. And that's insane in this format. That will stall as long as you need to and lock out the game. I think getting rid of Glimmer Post would bring it down. Now, I do believe the 8-post green deck did exist in one form pre-Glimmer Post. Someone can feel free to correct me on this, but I have a memory of this deck running with just Cloud Post. So I think the deck on itself could survive with just Cloud Posts, and it would be brought back a little. Even if it switched to Trons, it would be, less powerful than it is with Glimmer Post. And at the same time, you wouldn't necessarily kill off those other rogue decks. I think like Rebels and Green could still survive on just Cloud Post. When it comes to Glimmer Post, it kind of brings maybe some of those other rogue decks up. Some of those may die off getting rid of Glimmer Post, but I think it really is the stronger of these 2 lands and the one that needs to be addressed. More importantly, this is maybe going more specifically towards the Is It Post. Some Dimir Post are on this card, but I think Capsize is the bigger problem when it comes to the 8-post decks. Now, some of you may think I'm absolutely nuts on this because a lot of times these decks only run a single copy of Capsize. And you know, it's true, it's not, you're like one card, it's not a big deal, but what it comes down to is the fact that the deck has a lot of draw. They're usually running only 4 Muldrift or something like that. That's a lot of card draw. More importantly, they're running at least 2 copies of Mystical Teachings, which allows them to tutor up the Capsize. Forbidden Alchemy is another one that has basically enabled them to kind of dig through their deck and find these cards. You know, it's the same thing, you know, with them running only a single copy of Rolling Thunder. It doesn't matter that there's only one. They've got, you know, they've got the Mnemonic Wall, which can bring it back if you finally counter it. This card is what basically allows this deck to get so broken. When you have that much mana regeneration, buyback of 3 is no big deal. We can continue to cast Capsize and lock you out. Now, a lot of times what this comes down to is bouncing your opponent's lands. Now, I've been on the wrong side of Capsize. I've conceded to it a lot of times because it absolutely locks out the game. You know, even playing mono blue control with all those counterspells, you know, Izzet Post is able to back up the Capsize with more counterspells. And like I said, if the counterspells, you know, finally get it to the graveyard, they do have the opportunity to bring it back in the wall. Another thing that they do a lot of times with Capsize is used to again, bounce the Glimmer Post. When you can continually Capsize a Glimmer Post, you can keep replaying that and gaining the life. Capsize onto Muldrifter, etc., etc. This card is really broken. Even if, you know, I don't care if it's a single, you can't restrict it, you need to ban it. Because this card, I think, breaks this deck. It really enables you to stall and lock out the game. And that's not interactive. That's not fun. It's not, you know, I don't think it should exist that way. I really honestly think this is a broken thing for this deck. You know, and it kind of brings out an interesting thing because Capsizes existed before Glimmer Post and before the Post's decks existed in the formats. But, you know, I really think the Capsize is the answer to bringing down this deck. And you can feel free to disagree on that, but, you know, that's what it is in my opinion. Next we're going to look at is Storm. Storm is not something I personally play. As you can see here, I found out that I don't even own a single copy of Grapeshot, which I was honestly surprised by. I don't usually play Storm because I'm not, you know, a math guy. I don't like having to worry about, do I have the pieces I need in hand? Am I going to draw that extra card that I need to switch the colors, etc., etc.? I mean, I like to think in Magic, but I don't want to waste that much thought on, you know, calculations. I'm not a math guy. It's not my thing. But Storm is consistently a top 3 deck. What really makes Storm powerful is the fact that it has the ability to win on turn 2. I've personally been on the end of a turn 2 loss against Storm. It was specifically the Kiln Fiend version, which is kind of interesting because they won without even casting a Storm card. So I think that Storm is definitely a powerful thing. You know, we're working in a format where all the cards are common. You know, sure, we want to have a high power level, but you need to have a scale here. You know, the same way you have a miniature car to a real car, there's a scale. You know, when you're running a Storm deck and you scale it down to the common level, you know, you're taking out all the tendrils and stuff like that. When you scale it back, it should not have the same power level to kill you on turn 2. This is my opinion, at least. Now, it's kind of an interesting thing. If you get rid of this deck, you basically open up, you know, that's it for combo. This is the heaviest played combo deck out there. There is some play from Fissure Storm, but more, and actually I've recently conceded the fact that Infect is a combo deck, but, you know, basically this is the combo deck of Pauper. So, you know, I'm really questioning whether or not Wizards would ever make a change to this deck. A lot of people recently have been calling for Empty the Warrens to be the card to go. They think that getting rid of this will solve the problem. I highly disagree. I think Empty the Warrens is a very strong card, but, you know, you basically come down to 2 pieces of the puzzle. you can either lose to Grape Shot or you can lose to Empty the Warrens. Now, when it comes to sideboarding options, we have a lot of options out there in Pauper to deal with Empty the Warrens. You have most of them in black: Shrivel, you get Nausea, you get Echoing Decay, and Crypt Rats, but you also get the Seismic Shudder from red. Blue has Echoing, Truth that allows you to bounce all those tokens. There are answers in other colors. You know, it's a troublesome thing, and you could still dominate with Empty the Warrens, but there's answers to it, and not enough answers that it becomes an underpowered matchup after game one. But the issue is that Grape Shot, there's not as many issues, or not as many answers. Even Moment's Peace can stop Empty the Warrens. When it comes to Grape Shot, you get Prismatic Strands, and basically that's your only answer. I mean, someone can feel free to point something else out to me, but that's the only answer that I've really come across for Grape Shot, other than disrupting their storm. So I feel that getting rid of Grape Shot will bring back the power of the deck, because Empty the Warrens has some answers that you can have in your sideboard. Now, also at the same time, you haven't really killed the deck. I said earlier, what a banning needs to do is tone back the power of a deck, but not kill it. Now, if you get rid of Grape Shot, you can still win with Storm on turn 2. I just said a little bit ago that I lost on turn 2 to a Storm deck that was running Kiln Fiends. I think that version would become a little more popular. The Empty the Warrens version is already popular. And you would still have the power level without killing off the deck. And, that's great. That's ideal. Another thing that was proposed, and I discussed it, but I'm not going to go into too much detail, is Rite of Flame. Because I'm not a Storm player, I'm not familiar with, how many spells it takes, what the mana counts are, and I'll leave that, open to someone who is more familiar with the deck to talk about. I did propose the question to a Storm player on Pure's comments, to see if he could help me understand it better, but, I am leaving it open-ended. It was suggested that getting rid of Rite of Flame would slow down Storm. I think the deck could survive without it, just from an outsider's view. You do get a lot of options in black that could start being used more often, like Dark Ritual, to make up for the mana loss, but this was based off a mechanic in Cold Snap, and one of the only cards in Cold Snap really that still sees play in tournament formats is this Rite of Flame, and it not only adds 2 red to your mana pool, but the red increases for each time, each copy of Rite of Flame you have in your graveyard. So this is really kind of a key part, but I'm not sure, not being a Storm player, whether or not getting rid of this would completely kill off the Storm format. So I do leave that open to discussion. I did want to mention it because someone mentioned it in a discussion online, and I understood what they're saying. Maybe there is a piece, if not Rite of Flame, something else that could come out of that Storm to slow it down a little bit. And I did want to mention that just for discussion's sake. So the next thing, I wanted to talk about, and I really had only intended on focusing this article on the decks that hit this top 3, because they're always top 3. But what I realized is, in talking about Storm, I was talking about how powerful it was for a deck to win on turn 2, and at the same time there's another deck going kind of under the radar that can do the same exact thing, which is Infect. Now, it's really interesting. I think it's something that may not see the ban list, despite its power level, because if you look at the charts, I've covered 3 weeks now, Infect has kind of stayed under the radar. There's not a lot of people running it, because there's some answers. They're not great answers, but there are some answers to it. That are out there. So I think it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed, but at the same time, it's probably not going to be because of the power level. The deck can win on turn 2, really thanks to Glistener Elf. The card that I absolutely recommend for banning, or at least restricting, is Invigorate. And this goes back to, again, can the deck survive without it? Yes, the most powerful card in the deck is the Glistener Elf. This card allows that turn to win, because you can get this turn 1 elf into play, and after summoning Sickness on turn 2, you can attack for the win. Where Infect really dominates is the fact that it doesn't care about life at all. I talked a little bit earlier about Glimmer Post and how life affects that, how life is an underestimated thing in this format, But what it really comes down to is the fact that Infect doesn't care. Gain as much life as you want, I just have to hit you 10 times and I win. That's what it comes down to. So when it comes to Invigorate, what this card basically reads is, instead of pay 3 mana and get target creature +4/+4, you can pay 0 mana and get creature 4/4. Why would I pay 3 when I can pay nothing? It sounds like a great trade-off to me. I don't know what else I can say to that. I mean, it is. Life gain means nothing, so all of a sudden this elf on turn 2 is swinging for 5 for nothing. I mean, I have right now, turn 2 I play elf, or turn 2 I have the elf in play and I play Invigorate. I've paid 1 green mana for a 5/5 creature that is going to kill you, if it hits twice. Now, more importantly, you get this mutagenic growth, and I'm not sure this one needs to be banned. It needs to be talked about in conjunction with Invigorate, because it's the same thing. This is kind of an ideal play. You get the elf on turn 1, and turn 2 I use Invigorate plus the growth, and right now, I'm looking at a 7/7 creature just off of these 2 spells. I've paid 1 green mana over 2 turns, and I am swinging for 7. And that's incredible. I only need to hit you 3 more times to win the game. Now, there are some matches against Infect, there is nothing you can do. Because this deck can win on turn 2 consistently, and I would even say more consistently than Storm, there is nothing you can do. There are occasions where the deck has the I win hand, and no matter what you draw or play, you are going to lose. Now, imagine this. If you are on the draw, my opponent turn 1 Glistener Elf. Okay, my turn, I put down, Island. It doesn't matter, I put down a land. Turn 2, my opponent, goes off. He's swinging with the elf right here in 2 cards. He's hitting me for 7, and he's got, he's put a second land down, put down a Vines of the Vastwood, something like that. He's just hit me for the win. What am I going to do with 1 mana? There's not a lot of answers. It has to be instant speed. It would have to be, I could maybe Innocent Blood if it was my turn and I'm playing black and I had it on the draw, and I would play it on my turn 1. But other than that, most decks cannot handle with 1 mana a 10/10 creature swinging for the win. There's nothing you can do. So what has to be done is something has to be done to reduce the power. Now, I think Invigorate is the answer to bringing the power down. I think maybe you could restrict it and it would still be fine, but it definitely has to be kind of brought back. And this deck can absolutely survive without it, because you still would have the growths. You still get a lot of the pump spells. There's almost an endless number of pump spells that green has at instant speed that would enable it, that it could replace with Invigorate. And if people think that's too great, like I said, restrict it so you still have a copy of Invigorate in there, and you can still bump up those other 3 with any other spells out there that pump creatures. I mean, it's so powerful that it's almost more powerful than Storm, just because of the fact that you can get that nuts draw and you can pull it off on turn 2 when your opponent's sitting on 1 mana. What are you going to do with 1 mana? It astounds me. But I think basically the fact that it is not seeing play is really going to slow it down when it comes to the discussion regarding banning and whatnot. So there you go. That's my discussion. I could have dove into every deck, but these were the ones that I felt really needed to be discussed, really needed to talk about. I encourage your discussion on this. If you don't want to talk here, definitely go over to puremtgo.com, join in the comments there. I will be checking them frequently and providing more onto the discussion. I really think it's something that's great to talk about. So again, definitely check out the article. I may have missed something that I wrote up there that I didn't say here, so go check it out on puremtgo.com. Last time I'll say it, and see what that's all about. See others' comments regarding this. Next week will be kind of another off week for my casual fans. I do apologize, but I am going to do kind of like a month in review. It's been 4 weeks now with me tracking the metagame for Pauper. I'm going to kind of talk about what we've seen in the past month. Rogue decks that have really shown up, what could happen, this and that. Just take a look and analyze the meta. But again, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you definitely join in the discussion when it comes to the ban and restricted list for Pauper. So enjoy, and I hope you guys check me out next week as well.